Real Mary King's Close. We're just above the close itself just now in one of our little workshop rooms. That's not what we're talking about today though. We are talking about the 250th anniversary of Robert Fergusson's death. That's what we're celebrating this year. Before we jump into the live stream, we're going to hear from our very own resident Robert Fergusson and hear a little poem from him.
Sure. Bread claith geese folks and unco hees, made many a kaleworm butter fleas, gied many a doctor his degrees for a little skaith. In short, you may be what you please in good bread claith. For though you had as wise a snoot on as Shakespeare or Sir Isaac Newton, your judgment folk would still hate doot on. I'll take my eighth, until they'd seen you wi' a suit on, a good bread claith.
That's wonderful. What is the poem?
Braid claith, or broadcloth. It's kind of satirising how someone's style of dress influences how people think of them. And although you had as wise a snoot on as Shakespeare or Sir Isaac Newton, no one would care if you were in rags. Kind of fits the theme here again.
Thank you so much, Robert Fergusson, of course, or should I say Matt. Matt is one of our resident storytellers here at the Real Mary King's Close. And we're also joined by Dr Amy Wilcockson, a research assistant from the University of Glasgow, who is currently working on the project The Works of Robert Fergusson, Reconstructing Textual and Cultural Legacies. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so lovely to be here and so great to be talking to everyone.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure to
Thank
have you. Folks, if you do have any questions during this talk, I've got a bunch of questions here that we're going to go through, but feel free to pop them in the comments. We will do our best to answer as many as we possibly can. This is a working site as well, so you might hear a guarding loo or two in the background. If you can't hear us at any point, please just pop a little comment in and we'll make sure to rectify that. Firstly though, Matt, if you could just give us a little bit more about Robert Fergusson. Who was Robert Fergusson?
Well, Robert Fergusson's a poet. He was an Edinburgh poet, wrote a lot about Edinburgh. And his style was the inspiration to the slightly more famous Robert Burns. And that's always who he seems to be mentioned in the same breath as. But here we like to try and use Ferguson's name as much as possible. Try and bring him up to Burns' level a bit.
Yeah. Thank you for giving us that wee glimpse into Fergusson. Amy, what initially drew you to Robert Fergusson?
Yes, okay. So I actually first found out about Fergusson from one of your tours, which I think is so cool. It's so cool to be here chatting to you now. So last summer, I came on one of the Pride tours, which obviously Robert Fergusson features quite heavily on. And I didn't know very much about Fergusson before that, but this kind of a story of this Edinburgh poet essentially, who had such an interesting but short life. He died when he was just 24. And he's buried in the Canongate Kirkyard, just further down the Royal Mile. The fact that he was such a great poet and his death was so tragic. He fell down this flight of stairs. He hit his head. He got sent to the Bedlam Asylum. It sort of captured my imagination, really, and I wanted to know more about him. So I went home, did a bit of research, and then a couple of months later, the Robert Fergusson project that I'm on kind of came up, and I thought this looks like something I'd like to be involved in. And so the combination of Fergusson's kind of, as I've said, really sort of poignant, interesting life story and the sort of vibrant nature of his poems really resonated with me. So that's kind of what drew me to Fergusson.
That's amazing to hear as well about the Pride tours too, because
yes,
you've been doing it for 3 years I think now as well.
Yeah.
So it's incredible to hear that that's what's kind of brought on for you.
Yeah, and we're so thrilled to be, the project, myself, we're so thrilled to be working with you guys here at Real Mary King's Close. So, yeah.
The Pride tours are really fun as well.
Yeah.
Because that's why Fergusson features, because it was Edwin Morgan cited him as the person in Scottish literary history most likely to be queer. And we sort of expanded on that.
Yes, it's so cool to be kind of look at him from that angle as well, I think, as scholars, so yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Matt? What drew you to Robert Fergusson?
Well, I kind of first met him when I was growing up in Edinburgh as a statue. Probably high school was the first time I remember. I remember I had a friend that drunkenly tried to pick a fight with a statue from across the street. But then the next time was just when I was given him as a character here. Didn't really know much about him. And so started doing some research, and it's just become a bit of a rabbit hole. There's so much to go on.
Yeah. You've learnt a lot about Robert Fergusson. I would say.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, just a little. You've even gone so far as to meet with the Cape Club, which Fergusson was a part of.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the Cape Club and how is it specifically related to Mary King's clothes?
Well, the Cape Club was Fergusson's kind of social club. They are still a club today. Fergusson used to meet with them close by here, on Craig's Close. There's a little plaque at the side of this building that says Craig's Close and the Isle of Man Tavern was the spiritual home of distinguished Edinburgh poet Robert Fergusson. And there's still a tavern on Craig's Close, Mortal Cocktail, which is weirdly the spiritual home of Matt the tour guide. Mortal Cocktail. Hi Nicky, love you. But the Cape Club, they kind of died out for a little bit. They had a few famous members before. James Watts, the inventor and engineer, Deacon Brodie, I think he was a member. They died out a bit and then they were revived recently. I think a guy who used to be in the Masons decided he was sick of the Masons, so he's going to start his own club and revise the Cape Club. I think it's now his sons that run it. But they're a nice bunch of guys. Some of them are cool historians. Some of them are just there for a few pints and a bit of socialising. Probably like the Cape Club
I was
used
going
to
to say,
be.
very similar to I think how the Cape Club used to be. Yeah, it was a kind of group of artists and poets and intellectuals, and they used to get together, as Matt was saying, to drink and to talk and kind of socialise in a convivial fashion. So I think the Cape Club are actually, they do a whiskey pour every year, I think, on Ferguson's grave. So that's going to be happening on the 25th of September. They're going to go and pour a bit on his grave and celebrate him. So that'll be an interesting.
Yeah,
It happens every year as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It happens every year. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I went last year, but before that it was mainly just the Cape Club.
Yeah.
So it was just the Cape Club, and then one year I started coming, and then the next year I think we brought another couple of guides from Mary King's.
Yeah.
And this year there's a whole crowd.
This year there's a whole crowd.
Yeah.
It's going to be great.
So it's nice to hear kind of what's been happening regularly over the years to honour Robert Fergusson. But can you tell us a little bit more specifically about the University of Glasgow's project, the works of Robert Fergusson, Reconstructing Textual and Cultural Legacies Project?
Yes, that's a very long title. I can. So the project is split into two halves really. So the first thing that we want to do on the project, it's a two-man team. It's myself and the principal investigator of the project, Professor Rhoda Brown, who's Professor of Scottish Literature at the University of Glasgow. And as I said, it's split into two halves. The first half is that we are editing a new version of Ferguson's poems. So we're going to include all of his poems. Some of his poems in manuscript haven't actually been published in with all of his poems before. So that's really exciting. And also we're using the magazines that he published in for the first time as our kind of core texts that we're taking our versions of the text from. So Fergusson began his career writing in a weekly magazine in Edinburgh called The Weekly Magazine, and he became really, really famous for essentially writing in this magazine nearly every week from 1771 to 1773. So to use those kind of texts for the first time has been really fun, and I've got to go in lots of archives and look at these really old magazines, so that's been great. So that's kind of half of the project. The other half of the project is to commemorate, to celebrate 250 years this year on October the 17th since the death of Robert Fergusson. We're helping run and working with amazing project partners like yourselves to put on lots of events, lots of celebrations of Robert Fergusson, and that'll be carrying on sort of through the next few months and then into next year as well, as the project ends next September. So another year to go, so very exciting, but we're doing some really fun stuff so far, which is
amazing.
great.
And you spoke a little bit about the start of looking at his poetry.
Yes.
Specifically. What is it that makes Robert Fergusson's poetry so unique, and why is it important for you all to preserve and study his work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think Ferguson's poetry is so kind of interesting and unique because he was very much an Edinburgh poet, very much a poet of Edinburgh. He wrote about the normal people of Edinburgh. One of his poems is The King's Birthday in Edinburgh. And instead of it being about the king, which you would expect with that title, it was about all the kind of normal people in Edinburgh, all the kind of everyday Edinburgh folk and what they got up to on that day. So it's quite raucous, it's quite wild. There's people's wigs being set on fire and sort of dead wet cats having to be flung at them to put the fire out. It's very, very wild. But I think you get a real sense of kind of the vivacity and liveliness of Edinburgh through Fergusson's poems. He writes in Scots as well as English, so I think it's really nice to get the Scots language in there as well. And that's something that we're looking at on the project too.
Yeah, amazing.
So yeah.
I think it's probably for both of you.
Sure.
But in your opinions, what makes Robert Fergusson's story and poetry still relevant today, and why should people learn about him and read his poems?
I go for that.
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, I like Ferguson's poems, especially kind of as a history tour guide, because like he writes a lot about historical events and opinions, like the King's birthday.
Yes.
Talking about how the people of Edinburgh didn't quite agree with the city guard, who were the King's guys, and there was a total riot every time the King had his birthday.
Yes.
And then was it like 10 years later, there was an actual riot called the King's Birthday Riots. So like Ferguson sort of talking about the mood of people at the time. He marks certain points in history, and he's also kind of like part of the chain. He's not the first one to write in his style, but he kind of connects Alan Ramsay, Robert Fergusson, Robert Burns. He just fits in there nicely.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he's one of the kind of big three, the big three, I guess, vernacular poets of the 18th century, and we talk about the three of them usually, kind of in conjunction. So that's why it's so nice, I think, to be doing this project as well. The University of Glasgow have just finished a big Ramsay project and are coming to the final stages of the big Burns project. So to do Fergusson, it's kind of like the odd one out as well. So it's really like the one that's missing, I guess. So that's really cool to be able to do that as well.
And his story as well, the fact that he's kind of become an unintentional advocate for mental health as well.
He has, yeah. That's a
he,
good point. Yeah.
I mean, he lived at a time where there was 2 times people, the sane and the insane. He ended his life in the asylum. But his physician was Andrew Duncan, who saw Fergusson, this man of genius, spiralling into insanity. And he, after that, made big strides in mental health care in Edinburgh. And the Royal Edinburgh Hospital, still our psychiatric hospital, has a Robert Fergusson unit.
It does for people recovering from brain injuries.
Yeah.
So his legacy, I guess, is still in, alongside the statue, alongside the literature, the kind of mental health and well-being legacy of Ferguson's really, really strong as well.
I think he's definitely a name that you hear a lot in Edinburgh.
Yes.
And I think that he is really ingrained within our history. So we're quite familiar with him, but for anyone who isn't so familiar with him, where would you recommend they start when looking at Fergusson?
That's such a good question. I found it quite daunting initially as an English person reading the Scots, but I think once you get your ear into it as an English person, you really get the sense, like we were saying, of the liveliness. I mean, Matt just recited Brayclay beautifully just then. So I think Brayclay is quite a good one. I like Old Reekie as well, which is about Edinburgh as a city. I think that one's a really nice one. They're both in Scots. One of my favourite ones is actually in English, and it's To Dr Johnson, Food for His New Dictionary. And so Dr Johnson was the guy who basically put together the first dictionary, and Fergusson didn't like him very much. So he writes this poem where he basically includes loads of made up words, and he's basically like, you should include these in your dictionary. So it's quite a fun one, I think, for people to read. What about you, Matt? Which one's your favourite?
I mean, Auld Reekie is kind of a classic. It's kind of what made the name Auld Reekie famous, I guess, as well. He's managed to coin that phrase. I like the King's Birthday as well.
Yes.
There's a few great lines in that. Daft Days is kind of one of the first ones I got. I can share King's Birthday. Okay. Oh, no, I got a really good. One of my favourite lines from our stanzas is because the King's Birthday, it starts with like the city guard getting really drunk in Edinburgh Castle, and then the 21 gun salute fires for the King's Birthday, and like I say, they just descend on Edinburgh and cause all sorts of mayhem, harass people, extort money, and Fergusson compares this rage of the city guard to like a massive cannon. And if the cannon was as big as the rage of the city guard, it could shoot all the way across Fife and kill someone. So as it goes, right, seen Alabama to be gannon, but by my soul he was a cannon. You'd kill a man if he were standing in the Shire of Fife. sax lang Scots miles for Clackman and take his life. So yeah, essentially the rage of the city guard could shoot a ball across Fife and kill someone. And I like that doing castle tours I found out if you load the 1 o'clock gun, you could actually do that. You could take out Kirkcaldy.
There we go. Historical accuracy there.
And he saw it coming 250 years later, maybe.
I love that.
It's really nice kind of talking a little bit more about Ferguson's legacy and kind of especially reflecting on it after 250 years. How do you think, Amy, Robert Fergusson has influenced the evolution of Scottish literature, and what role did he play in shaping the works of other notable poets, such as Robert Fergusson?
This is a very excellent question. We kind of touched on it a bit, I think, but the main reason I think why people will know Fergusson is through Burns, because Burns was a really huge Fergusson fan. So he didn't actually meet, Fergusson died I think 13 years before Burns came to Edinburgh. But kind of practically, Burns really loved Fergusson so much that he actually paid for Ferguson's gravestone, which I think is something that maybe people don't really know. So Burns came to Edinburgh, he went to look at Ferguson's gravesite. There was no marker on it because his family were very poor. He sort of died in poverty. And Burns thought, this isn't right, I need to do something about this. So we've got letters and the kind of bill of sale where Burns actually pays for. It took him a couple of years to pay off as well, so it was something that he was really obviously invested in. But he actually paid off this gravestone, and if you go to the Canongate Kirkyard, the same stone is still there, and on the back of the stone, Robert Burns' name's there, which is fascinating, I think. He also wrote a number of poems about Fergusson, and he called him by far my elder brother in misfortune, by far my elder brother in the muse, I think. Yeah, so so he was really, really inspired by Fergusson. He said he wasn't going to write any more poetry, and then he read Ferguson's Scotch verses and thought, yes, actually, I feel re-inspired, reinvigorated. So there's a lot in his letters and in his poems about Fergusson. Probably another really interesting one is Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote Treasure Island and Dr Jekyll and Mr Hyde. He was also completely obsessed, essentially, with Fergusson as well. And one of his letters, he says something really strange. He says, I believe that Fergusson lives in me, which is just, he was completely enamoured with Fergusson. And he actually died before he was able to do anything about it, but he was hoping to refurbish Ferguson's grave. So there's a marker on the bottom of Ferguson's grave that sort of tells you what Stevenson would have done. So that's quite interesting. But throughout the years, Ferguson's kind of what Rona, my boss, would call a poet's poet. So a lot of poets are really influenced by him, not just Burns, not just Stevenson, but people like Edwin Morgan, who we mentioned. Meg Bateman writes Gaelic poems about him. Kathleen Jamie's written about him before. A lot of big names, essentially, in Scottish literature have been influenced by Fergusson.
Yeah.
Did you want to
No, I just like Edwin Morgan wrote a good one about him as well, like about the night of his death.
In the Cells. I think
it's like a very
short
short one about how Fergusson, it was apparently furiously insane. That's why they committed him to the asylum.
Yes.
And how he got there was his friends told him they were going to go meet them in the Isle of Man Tavern, where Mortal Cocktail is now. And they ordered him a sedan chair, which is like the middle class, the Uber of the day.
Yes.
They told him they were going to go meet him at the bar, but instead he ended up in the asylum.
Yeah.
And it's quite a touching poem about it. But also it's funny because, well, I guess a lot of Ferguson's very last poems were quite scathing about his friends.
Yeah.
Which you can kind of understand, you know?
Yeah.
But you can tell by Edwin Morgan's one that he really had an affection for him as well, I think.
I think so.
Yeah. Obviously, you've put so much work into this project. What kind of challenges have you found within the process?
For me personally, I think it was probably the Scots language initially that I found a little bit difficult because I never really encountered it before. But as I said, I think if you really get your ear into it, start listening to it. Matt's actually recorded some of Ferguson's poems, they're on YouTube. So I was listening to those, like getting my head really in the zone. So that was really nice. Thank you for that. Very helpful. Yeah. So I think that was a real challenge. Also, I think just making sure that Fergusson was commemorated and celebrated in the way that we wanted to was quite a big challenge. You know, he's such a big character, I think, and not enough people know about him. So it's I'm enjoying the fact that we've got amazing project partners like yourselves that are willing to sort of help us get Ferguson's name out there a bit more. And you guys are doing it anyway. I mean, you influenced me to know about Ferguson, so that's what we're aiming for moving forwards with people as well. So it's great.
It's incredible to hear again, just kind of how it keeps coming full circle.
Yeah.
But I think that's the amazing thing about history. You learn one thing and then you go off, and then someone else learns it, and then it kind of passes back and forth. So it's been amazing getting to work on this project as well. It feels like quite full circle for us too. We're chatting about your challenges, but Matt, you face challenges as well. During your tour, Matt, how do you balance the historical accuracy of Ferguson whilst obviously we don't know everything about him, your own interpretation of him as a person?
Well, I guess trying to use as many of Ferguson's words as I can. So like if we can quote him, then it's kind of more like less our opinion. It's like, oh, here's what he said. You guys can sort of make up your mind.
Yeah.
And our tours are kind of fun here. They're funny. And Ferguson was a bit of a joker, so I feel like adding the kind of humour element onto the tour, whether it might not have been his style or not, something you would have approved of.
I think he'd love it.
I mean, that letter to Sam Johnson was hilarious.
Yeah, it's very funny.
And there's lots of Fergusons here as well, so I play him from kind of one angle, whereas a lot of the other people here will play him from entirely different angles. Lots of sides to Ferguson to play.
Yeah. I think so, and that's what makes him such a good character for your tours, right? Like you can tap into all the different perspectives of him and the different kind of parts of his personality. It's just super cool.
Yeah. Keeping on to the tour stuff, is there any in particular interactions you've had with people that are very memorable, kind of sticking with the Ferguson side of it?
Well, I remember when I first started, I was thinking about it earlier, I got one TripAdvisor review, and it was from a family, and mum, dad and girl, and they left the review like, oh, after we left the tour, we went straight down to Canongate Kirk to check out Ferguson's grave. And it's like 2 or 3 years ago now, and there's a picture of this kid next to the Ferguson statue after the tour. I was like, that was really sweet. I did have another one where I started the tours by getting people together. So everyone knows Robert Fergusson. Nobody ever does. Apart from 1 or 2 tours, perhaps. One, there was just one guy there with quite a big family. Anyone know who Ferguson is? And he just looks me in the eye and goes, you died in the madhouse. And I'm like, that's true, but okay, a bit intense, man. But that was quite memorable. He was right. But
I think one of the great things about kind of working in a historical environment is that every day you get to tell people something new about someone, and every day someone new becomes more invested in people's stories, and I think we see that so much here at Mary King's Close. So I'm sure you felt that as well, just like especially that story about that family immediately going down. They've probably not had that thought to do it before, and now they've been pulled in. Now that legacy is continuing. We're obviously doing our own event for the 250th. We've got a new Meet the Poet experience. Matt, are you able to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So we have a event, an experience after a regular tour where we come into this little room here and we try and teach you to write poetry in Ferguson's style. He had quite a few styles, but the particular one it's known as the Burns stanza now, because Burns took it from Ferguson, but Ferguson took it from Alan Ramsay, who originally took it from Robert Semple, was his name?
I think so.
He wrote a poem called, about a piper, Habby Simpson. And that was the first one to use the style, so it's the standard Habby. And it's quite a short, neat little style. It's still quite difficult to write it. So what we've done, we've made a little game, where after a tour, you come and hang out with a poet. And we have a little dram of whiskey and we explore some of Ferguson's poems.
I think that sounds wonderful. I'm going to go on every tour.
You'll catch me on it.
Yeah.
You can find out a little bit more about that on our website. We are booking online. You can also come in and chat to us about it. We're doing it on Friday the 20th and Friday the 27th of September, and we're running 4 tours a day throughout the day. We are about to wrap up with our questions. If anyone does have any questions, that would be a great time to throw them in. But I will go right back to Amy. Of course, we are doing Meet the Poet, but there are other events going on. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the other events that you're running?
Yes, that we've got quite a packed schedule actually for such a kind of small team on a project, I guess. So we have the project's based at the University of Glasgow. So we've been working with the Mitchell Library, which is the big main library in Glasgow. And we've installed an exhibition there. So there's lots of old editions of Fergusson's poems. You guys are in here. We've got many pictures of Matt in our exhibition. So come along for that. So that's really great, and that's open till the end of October, till the 30th. So if you're over in Glasgow, come and take a look at that. We've got events happening with the portrait gallery in Edinburgh, because there's a really famous portrait of Fergusson that has been hiding away in storage for many years and is now back out in the open, especially ready for the sort of celebrations and commemorations. So head over to the portrait gallery and have a look at that. Our main kind of event that we're running is on the 17th of October at St Cecilia's Hall here in Edinburgh as well. And we're going to have the authors Billy Kay, Andrew O'Hagan, James Robertson and the musician Kirsty McHugh singing for us. I don't think the authors will be singing, but Kirsty will be singing. The authors will be talking about Fergusson, and that'll be chaired by Rona Brown. But that's going to be an amazing event, I think, and tickets are on sale now. But I think I am most excited for these Fergusson tours. They just sound so much fun. I love that you guys are bringing history kind of to life and reinvigorating Fergusson, and I like the fact that people are going to be able to actually meet the poet, as you said. I just think that's so cool, and we're really thrilled.
Amazing. I think we have some questions.
Yeah, for the people who joined live a little bit late, could you just give a summary again of who is Robert Fergusson?
Sure.
And why we're talking about him today?
So Robert Fergusson was an Edinburgh poet, inspiration to Robert Burns. They both wrote in a similar style, and Burns took a lot of his inspiration from Fergusson. As you're saying, Burns was considering giving up until he discovered some of Fergusson's poems and was inspired to rewrite in the Scots language. And Ferguson's poems are fun, vibrant stories of Edinburgh life, and they're not quite as well known as Burns's. So we're liking to try and promote Ferguson's name as much as we can.
Yeah, and I think Fergusson was known. I think if you do know of him, it is probably because either of Burns or because he died very tragically in the Bedlam Asylum when he was just 24 years old. So he's buried in the Canongate Kirkyard. His statue's outside there. So you can go visit him as well. Yes.
And we have a few people who have never seen the statue of Fergusson in Edinburgh. Can you say where to see it?
Ooh, so it's down the Royal Mile. Canongate Kirk is the name, near the Toll Booth Bar. Canongate Kirkyard is the name of the graveyard. And Fergusson, I like the statue because the sculptor David Anand, he doesn't call it a statue, he calls it a sculpture. Because it's not on a podium, kind of like all the other ones. It's down there walking along the streets he used to walk down himself. So it just looks like a guy wandering out of Greyfriars Kirk, where the grave is. On the streets that he loved so well.
Yes. It's great. The grave's really, you can see it. You just kind of go into the kirkyard and it's sort of on your left.
Yeah, so it's down the Royal Mile towards Holyrood Palace.
Yes.
And with that thought about what he used to walk, it's nice to think about how close he would have been to the close, how likely it was that he would have walked on this street, which is why it's so ingrained within our history as well.
Yeah.
And we have a question from Claire. I don't know if any of you know if Fergusson knew Dr Knox.
Oh.
No, Robert Knox. Nah, different time period, I don't think. Neither John Knox was earlier, Robert Knox was later.
Yes.
Because Robert Knox was the Birkin hair guy.
Yes. Different time periods.
He wouldn't have known Dr Knox, but he likely knew Deacon Brodie, who was the famous Edinburgh thief that was the inspiration for Jekyll and Hyde. Because they were both members of the Cape Club. I think that adds to the tragedy a bit, that Robert Fergusson died before Deacon Brodie was found out. We'd have loved that gossip. What poems we could have had written about Deacon Brodie's execution.
All the gossip.
Yeah. He did write about contemporary events and things that were happening as well, so he would have loved that.
Definitely.
Any more questions?
No, someone told us on TikTok they can listen to you all day. History and stories are so informative.
Thanks so much. Just keep giving us poetry. Close us off. Was that your favourite poem? The King's.
The King's Birthday. I mean, there's a lot of them. I mean, I could sign off with a poem. There's always one to get rid of.
With a poem.
Okay.
You've always got.
So this one, The End of Daft Days. So Daft Days is a poem Fergusson wrote about Christmas time, and just how nuts it gets in Edinburgh. It still does. It's kind of nice. It ends with O great God of Aqua Vitae, whiskey. So, O great God of Aqua Vitae, who sways the empire of the city, when fou or sometimes capernoity, thou be prepared to hedge us for that black banditti, the city gear. So in other words, if you're out in Edinburgh around Christmas and you're getting a bit too heavy in the Aqua Vitae, don't let yourself get too capernoity, and definitely don't let the city guard or the police catch up with you.
Yes.
Good advice till
Words, I was
today.
gonna say, words to live by, I feel.
Yeah, no, it's really nice hearing more. I think that, especially for our Meet the Poet, I think it's really important to have the words spoken as well as reading them too. I think that that's what's going to be quite exciting about the events coming up. Seeing the physical work and then also having Matt and our other incredible storytellers reading that poetry aloud.
So cool. Like I said, it's just so amazing that he's being brought to life in such a cool way, because that's what Real Mo King's Quotes does best, right? It brings accessible, interesting history to life, and that's...
Thank you.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, we're so excited. We're so thrilled on the project to be working with you, and so excited for these tours. So please, if you're watching, book on these tours. They sound so fun. I'm gonna try and not be annoying and be on every single one like a real fan girl. But it just sounds so fun. So yes.
Yeah, I'll be
Thank
trying
you.
to do the same. Trying to be there every single day. Thank you to everyone who's joined for taking your time to sit and listen to these two wonderful people talk about Robert Fergusson. It's something that's really dear to our hearts here at Mary King's Close, and of course the University of Glasgow's project, working really hard to continue that legacy forward. So thank you so much for joining us. You can find out more about our tours online. Is there anywhere you can find out more about the project?
Yes, we have a website which I can't remember, so I'm going to look on our little postcard and read it out. It is robert-fergusson.glasgow.ac.uk, so that's where the project is, and we're on Twitter and Blue Sky as well, so find out what we're doing on there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute honour to have you, Amy. And thank you, Matt, for coming down and spending your time with us as well.
Cheers, Becca.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.